The series that we are in right now is a series on wisdom. Wisdom in the Hebrew Bible, the first part of the Hebrew Bible, the first part of our Bible is the Hebrew Bible, rather. The word for the Proverbs is mishle. It's this word for ruling. How do we rule well? We have these different values that we hang up on the wall of things like love our enemy, but also we have things like stand up for justice. How do we thread the needle on those values? How do we know which giant red button in the sweaty meme to push? If we do not have wisdom, wisdom helps us make those calls. Wisdom helps us maneuver through those situations. We emphasize that it's relational. It's a conversation with God. God gives us these lessons for us to remember, to have as embodied memorials that we can live by. And also, God talks to us and advises us, counsels us when we need it as well. So that's how we seek wisdom. That's how we pursue wisdom. Last week, we talked about words. We talked about the way that God created the world through words and calls us to join God in that creative voice using in the world around us, not through dominating, not through winning, not through violence, but the use of gentle, surprising, tender words, this kind of third way, which takes us being engaged and creative and listening to God to be able to engage in. This particular week, we are talking about anger. This is the anger week. Go back one, Sarah. The anger week, the first thing that's important for me to get out there, and this might be the only thing you take with you the whole sermon if you go home right now, go in peace. But the thing before we look at any of these verses about anger is to know that anger is part of being human. It is part of being made in the image of God. Some of us were told that maybe as women we weren't allowed to have anger. Some of us were told maybe as men we weren't allowed to have anger. Some of us have been disqualified by others in the social sphere of, oh, you can't engage on this issue because you are too angry, because you have too many big feelings about that thing. Go sit down, right? God has anger. That's not the primary characteristic of God. It is not the enduring state of God. It is not one of the traits of God. But he does experience anger against great evil. And while we look at all of these verses, it's important to know that if you are experiencing anger, you have experienced anger, that is not something fundamentally broken about you. It is not something immediately that we need to repent of. It is something that happens when our heart has not been calcified over, right? When our calluses aren't so thick to the injustice and the evil of this world, we experience anger because God experiences anger. So that is our foundation before we talk about how do we deal with that anger? How do we encounter ourselves when we have anger? How do we talk to ourselves when we have anger? That is the most important thing. After we get that laid, then we can start to think about, okay, what kind of messages have I heard about anger? There's a lot of messages in the world about whether we're allowed to be angry, what that should look like, right? Some of that is from science. A lot of it is from outdated science, right? Like catharsis from this earlier than 60s has been disproved. Venting doesn't actually make you more happy. It actually trains your brain to stay in anger. So we'll be looking at science along the way occasionally as well. But we have this collection of verses. The references are on the Slack if you want to read along in your own translation. These will be my translations. All right, our first verse today. Those slow to anger are great in understanding. The one impatient in spirit raises up foolishness. Slow to anger, great in understanding. Impatient raise up foolishness. Okay, this is one of the chief characteristics of God. When God passes before one of the heroes of the Bible and God describes God's self, he says, I am Yahweh, and then he lists a whole bunch of things. One of those things that's key, the thesis of who God says God is that he is slow to anger. How and why is he slow to anger? God is slow to anger with us because God understands us, right? He created us, he knows our thoughts, he knit us together. He's not surprised by who we are, okay? So he understands us. He is the one, therefore, with the right to be angry, but instead he honors our complexity. we have probably had this experience where we encounter someone out there in the world who are kind of irritating us with whatever they're bringing to the table. Maybe it's something like they're really worried about masculinity in our world. They're really worried about gender roles, something like that. And it can be very easy for some of us to throw that person into a particular bucket and want to dismiss them. But when we get to know the person, it turns out the reason that they are really concerned about those issues is that their parent, their father, was not present in their life, right? They might have some part of their story that makes that particular concern really underlined, circled, and Sharpie, right? And when we get to know them and their story, that particular angst that's popping out of them starts to make more sense. The values of Refuge Church, we have 3 of them. The number 1 value is curiosity, or as part of our, is that our mission statement or vision statement? Something like that. It begins, may we be a people who practice curiosity. Curiosity about ourselves, but also curious about our enemies. God doesn't even have to make those judgment calls like we do, where we are guessing, because God knows us. He knows when we have legitimate pain in our story, but he also knows when we've just been listening to people who spur us on to more anger, etc. And yet, his slowness to anger comes from that complexity. So we are invited alongside God. We're walking in the image of God. We're presenting the character of God to the world. To alongside God, join in seeking out that complexity. What is it about you that makes you like this? And if I can know that, it's a lot harder to be frustrated with people, right? When we understand where they're coming from. Boy, this person's really wanting to grind out their work, their job, and they kind of make everybody else stressed. Oh, maybe they grew up in a situation where they didn't have enough, where there was some scarcity, and so they're afraid of losing their position, right? All that kind of complexity helps us address the people around us with compassion and with empathy. So, what's the second half of this proverb? The one impatient in spirit raises up foolishness. So slow to anger is contrasted here with impatience. When we snap at somebody, when we answer in a way that does not befit the character of God, when we aren't putting Jesus on display well, this proverb suggests that we are moving in that direction out of impatience. Impatience comes from not trusting that God is good or that God is just, and God's not going to take care of it. This person needs to hear the truth from me. For such a time as this, I have been put here to yell at this person, or to be short with them, or to correct them in some way, or to tell them how they could be doing it better, right? That can be really strong in some of us, others of us not so much, but that is coming from a lack of patience, right? A belief that yelling at the person, saying something cutting to them, demeaning, quick, harsh, whatever it is, we believe that that will work better than the long, slow work of God and gently, lovingly, tenderly working with them the way that God works with us, right? What is the effect of that impatience? Foolishness, right? The effect of being mean, aggressive, whatever that is, to other people ends up not putting the world back together. It raises up a different kind of Tower of Babel, one that does not bless the people around it, us, does not bless anyone around us or the Tower of Babel. We are invited instead to be in trust. When we trust God, when we trust that his ways work, when we trust that he is just, that enables us to cultivate patience and move forward with a loving posture. Okay, next proverb. What do we have? What should we avoid doing? This structure is the same throughout the series. Number 1, do not say, as it was done to me, thus I will do to him, and return to the man what he has done. I was outside on the sidewalk a couple years ago, and someone said to me that is to say, have the kind of day you have at the end. I also made that little sound in my heart, though that's not what I did with my voice, because she was not looking for input on that particular strategy that she has adopted. But this is, again, part of the world's way, this world's strategy with people who have displeased us, right? If karma is a thing, then I can be part of that karma, addressing the issue by returning back what you have done to you onto yourself. The expansive goodness of God makes us into people who do not need to mete out vengeance. The expansive goodness of God makes us into people who do not need to mete out vengeance. Jesus has so many parables about this. There's the man who has had his own debt forgiven, and then he encounters someone in the street moments later, and the person says that they can't pay their debt, and he reacts in anger against that servant, right? We are people who have been forgiven muchly, who have received great amounts of goodness and provision and kindness from God, and yet we become the judge of all the earth when looking at other people. We become people who don't believe in extending grace, that the grace that we've received won't impact them the same way that it impacted us. And we move ourselves into a position. Yes, there are lots of times in Scripture in which God talks about co-laboring with us, partnering with us, all these words that we're used to in church spaces. God really carves a deep line in the sand around the particular issue of vengeance over and over in all these different stories and different blatant statements. He says, vengeance is mine, right? That is a clear cutoff. That is not something that we're invited to co-labor with God in. The Punisher is not a Christian archetype. The Avengers aren't even a Christian archetype, right? The idea that we get to be part of the wrath of God on the earth is not something that we believe in as Jesus followers. And so we instead are invited to move with Jesus in incredible love and kindness against what we sense that person deserves, which, by the way, is probably wrong. How would we possibly know what they actually deserve? We can't. We're humans. What is it within us which drives us to give people what they deserve? Again, you guys might have other things to bring up during discussion. I would suggest, again, that it's trust. We do not trust God if we're trying to punish somebody else. We don't trust that God is going to do justly with that person, that God is going to come alongside that person, and so therefore we're driven to try to do it ourselves. Second one on this slide, what should we avoid? A person of hot, poisonous rage scrapes together conflict. The one slow to anger quiets contests. Person of hot, poisonous rage scrapes together conflict. The one slow to anger quiets contests. There's a difference in Hebrew between our word for anger, which is af. Say af. Amazing. That's the word for nose. If you're singing head, shoulders, knees, and toes, the nose is just off. The word for wrath, which I've translated here, hot, poisonous rage, based on the underlying imagery and cognate languages associated with Hebrew, is the word chara. Say chara. You can even feel the difference. Af is the word for nose, and it's that word because it's breathing air through your nose emoji. You know the one I'm talking about with like the clouds coming out? That's the Hebrew word for anger versus chara is when you're willing to like yell that at someone, right? There's a difference between anger and rage. Rage is something in the world which kills people. Rage is a function of violence. Rage is something that shuts down our prefrontal cortex because our amygdala is all lit up and telling us that we are in danger. Rage is different than anger, and this proverb says that rage scrapes together conflict. So if anger isn't bad, is it okay to still have anger, which can sometimes lead us into rage, to center that in the middle of our justice work, right? We want to partner with these nonprofits. We want to stand up against this. We want to be keyboard warriors. Please don't do that. But against some particular thing or entity or person or church or politician, we can't have the rage be the thing driving us, because the end effect of rage is just more conflict. It is not putting the world back together to have as the engine of that movement be an engine of, I'm going to subjugate you back into the place where you belong, right? That's not the way that God works. God's justice has to do with equity. It does not have to do with shoving people back down into the dust, which is what rage tends to want to do. So the one slow to anger quiets contests. Now, if your context distracts from actual liberation. This is so important. I think as progressive people, sometimes over the Thanksgiving meal, we're facing someone with different opinions on a theological issue, a political issue, a human rights issue, whatever it might be. It is true that we do not know the ripple effects of that conversation. Maybe that person that we're talking to is in relationship with an immigrant or has power over a certain situation that we're not aware of. That's certainly true. But a lot of the time, when we all of a sudden get our hands up to engage with somebody on something that we disagree with, it's not actually about liberation, right? The effect of me winning that argument is not somebody else finding flourishing. It's not people being released from incarceration. Often those conversations are about me proving that I am still a good Christian, right? Maybe if my family member is also a Christian, but they practice a different kind of Christianity. Sometimes some of us want to occupy a space of being like, yeah, but I'm still a real Christian, and maybe you're not, if that's the energy we felt from our Christian family members. And then politically, also, you think that you know what it is to be a true American. Well, let me show you how my beliefs are what America really is, right? That kind of thing happens all the time. That doesn't actually benefit anybody who is suffering. It's only about our egos. It doesn't mean that we never have those conversations and that they can't be good, but if we're slow to anger, if we can lead with that complexity and curiosity and nuance, knowing that the other person has a rich story that they're moving out of, that their opinions make sense and are cohesive within their life experience, that quiets that contest that can get so out of control so quickly. So then what do we do? We have the teachings of Jesus. We have some examples from Jesus all the way through our positive part of our wisdom series because he is our exemplar. He is the one whose path we are walking. And so we want to see how he has walked out wisdom. What does that look like? In the fall of your enemy, do not rejoice. When he stumbles, do not let your heart spin for joy, lest Yahweh see this evil in your eyes and determine to lift his anger from your enemy. This, if we decide to take it seriously for a moment, can be kind of chilling. We can let ourselves be provoked for just a moment into thinking about the fact that it could be that the hatred and scorn that we harbor in our hearts is why that institution or that church or that politician or whatever, why they are still flourishing. Could be because we have not winnowed that scorn out of our being. It's a pretty big thing to wrestle with, pretty provocative, and I think that it's helpful to us to remember where is the heart of God. If God isn't about shoving other people down into the dirt, what does he do when we, even just with our words, which we talked about last week, with our words, try to shove people into the dirt? How does God respond? This proverb says that he's always on the side of the person in the dirt. So an example of this from the life of Jesus, Luke 19, he is descending into Jerusalem. He knows that he is not going to come back from the city, that he's not going to leave it again because he is going to be murdered by the people who disagree with him. The people who are frustrated that he is not meting out justice and vengeance and violence the way that they want him to are going to turn that violence back upon Jesus. And what does he say? He approached, and Jesus saw Jerusalem, and he wept over it, saying, if you, even you, had known this day peacemaking, but now it is hidden from your eyes. For days will come upon you, and your enemies will lay siege against you. So again, Jesus is about to be murdered by these people. What is his response? Deep grief. Grief for them, because he knows that their lack of ability to negotiate in difficult situations is going to end in them experiencing suffering. And that doesn't make Jesus say, ha ha, you've got it coming, Pharisees and Sadducees, just you wait, Henry Higgins. That's a 1940s musical joke for those of you who aren't aware. He doesn't say any of that. He is weeping because he knows that they will experience suffering. May we be people who look at our enemies, the people who disagree with us, the people who wish that we weren't in the room right now, maybe people in your workplace, people totally different from this church in this particular moment. But may we be people who imagine those people and can pray for them that God would deliver them into a place of flourishing and well-being where they don't experience any suffering, where they don't experience the consequences of their actions. That is what Jesus doles out to those who are literally about to torture him to death. Can we do the same about people who are certainly not at this moment torturing us to death? What else? Last proverb here. When the ways of a person are delightful to Yahweh, even their enemies are at peace with them. When the ways of a person are delightful to Yahweh, even their enemies are at peace with them. Matthew 5, Jesus teaches about this embedded in the Beatitudes, close to the middle, which is important. He says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." Sons of God is about inheritance, right? And authority. We have authority in the world. We have inheritance. We have everything we need when we join with God in peacemaking, which is often unpopular to do. People don't tend to like peacemakers. We think of them as being affable, but peacemakers are the people who are willing to say something on behalf of the people that everybody else hates, right? They're offering compromises, often in situations where people don't want compromise. And yet when our ways, when our steps, when the way we walk out our faith delights God, it is also delightful to our enemies. It's not when the ways of a person are delightful to God, then their enemies cower in the corner because of the strength of our might, right? That's not it. This kind of sounds like in our culture, boy, you know, so-and-so and I disagree on a lot of things, but they're a pretty solid person. You know, that's a kind of statement we hear. Boy, I really wish so-and-so wasn't doing this, but I really admire how. Those are the statements. In the Bible, there's a story in Genesis of Isaac. Isaac is often forgotten in the scheme of the patriarchs, but he does the work all through the land. He's digging out these cisterns. It's a huge project. A cistern is like the size of this room sometimes, and you have to coat the whole thing in stone and lime and all this work. And he's doing this over and over, and his enemies keep coming and filling in those cisterns. That's not good for the community, obviously, because it's not just for Isaac, it's for the whole community to appreciate water when you live in a desert. And yet over and over again, instead of fighting with the people shoveling dirt back into his cisterns, he just goes and builds another one and says, okay, all right. 4 times, 3 or 4 times he does this, and then the person who owns the land comes riding up with his commander, whose name is like Mouth is a Sword, which is pretty cool, and then one of his other neighbors, and they show up, and Isaac says, hey, what's up? How can I help you? And Avimelech, this guy, responds, we can see that God is with you. Let us therefore make a covenant, have a feast together, be at peace with one another. It's that kind of forbearance, that commitment to peace, even when we've been wronged, even when great labor went into doing something good and other people want to stamp on it, saying, okay, let's wait for the day. God's going to do something. Justice is going to happen. Goodness is going to happen. I do not need to retaliate. Who knows what God might do? That's the kind of work that we are invited to. The last lesson from Jesus here, Luke 23, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Again, he could have had so much anger in this moment. He could have lashed out at people. We wouldn't be that surprised if he's talking to the thieves on the cross and he says, today you'll be with me in paradise. Today they will be in Hades, right? That kind of statement. We'd be like, yeah, sure, parallelism, got it, no problem. He doesn't say that. They do not know what they do. He's still imagining people with complexity. He's still moving in curiosity to say, boy, they have not really thought this moment through all of the components that they could have. And that leads to pray for them even upon his death. So again, could we be being called by Jesus to, if we're going to walk in his footsteps, in his dust, can we do the same? Of when we are hurt, when we experience offense, and the world says, you can't let them treat you like a doormat, what are we going to do? Can we move in forgiveness? Can we move in peacemaking and forbearance? Can we be people whose ways are delightful to God, who, if they do receive their comeuppance, we don't celebrate? Takeaways from today: God takes the time to know us intimately. We are called to become slow to anger in the same way. Can we become slow to anger? Anger is not bad. Jumping to anger shows that we are missing pieces of the puzzle, or we're not choosing to see them, right? To take the time to pursue them. Number 2, when we can trust in God's justice and goodness, we are able to find ease, or at least more ease, and see our enemies as people. So sometimes, as we're deconstructing and reconstructing, one of the things that can get hucked out the window kind of fast is a conversation about the afterlife. That's a different sermon at a different time, and sometimes that happens for totally legitimate reasons. But when we do that, sometimes we find ourselves trying to reconstruct and try to figure out how we want to live out our values of loving graciousness and forgiveness to others. And if we don't have any kind of replacement component for God's justice, it feels like, but I'm the only one who's going to fix this. So I have to stand up. I have to do it. Can we find ways, whether we include the afterlife or hell or any other kind of thing, can we find ways to trust in God's justice, that he is making all things well, that at the last all things will be made right, all things will be brought back together in him, and all things will be set correctly and good, so that there is no more suffering in the world? Can we trust that, even if we've thrown that out? Invitation for us this morning. We're going to sing a song next about taking up this particular call. Can we be people who are willing to say, yep, my movement toward other people, I want it to be in a place of curiosity and asking questions, not presuming that I know the answers. I want to be talking to God about it. I want to be someone who's slow to anger. That's what this is about. There's a verse that says, help me, basically, it says, help me to say things even when I know the other person will have a big reaction, right? Just because we're avoiding becoming people who are fast to anger doesn't mean that we never say the truth. Doesn't mean that we don't say things that are right. Doesn't mean that we don't stand up for the oppressed and the marginalized. We still do all of that, yet we want to lead from a place that's slow to anger. So I'm going to pray, we're going to sing the song, and then hang out and talk about it. God, I thank you that you have given us a path to walk. Your good news is not just about knowing that we're all good and then kind of plodding along, doing our best until we keel over at some point. You have given us a path to walk that is meaningful, that's full of purpose. This path gives us direction. It helps us when we don't know what to do. I pray that you would train us in this walk, in this path. Help us to think clearly about our own patterns, the way that those patterns might have been passed down to us in our family, in our churches. Help us to know that it's okay if we're experiencing anger at the evil and injustice in the world. If we've been told that that's not okay, please help us to find our solace in you, because we know that you also respond with your emotions, we're made in your image, against evil and injustice in the world. Help us to be people who pursue others with complexity, wanting to know them with intimacy and nuance, wondering, why are you that way? Why do you care so much about this? Teach me, tell me about it. Help us to learn from you. You are so expansive that you are able to forgive people and advocate for them even as they were murdering you. Help us to be people who are able to say with gratitude, wow, you made this person who I so disagree with so many wonderful traits. And you are grieved, I think, God, that they have used all of those strengths and turned against you or turned against what the gospel really is. Help us to be people who grieve that, who don't have scorn in our heart. Remove that from us. Let your will be done. Let justice reign. Let all things be made well. Pray all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen.